By the way, there's a different approach to it. I mean, the fact that he descended to Mitzrayim, and this is, as we know, Abraham Avinu had 10 different challenges, right? And Hashem, in a sense, was testing Abraham Avinu to see what is he going to do, and then only by the 10th challenge, which was Akedat Yitzchak, right? Bounding of Yitzchak, of Isaac. Then Hashem turns to Abraham and tells him at that moment, Ki ata yadati ki yireh Elohim ata. This point, I know that you are fearing someone who's fearing God, who is in awe of God. Which means that, in a sense, Hashem asked Abraham Avinu to go to Eretz Canaan, and he put him in this difficult situation, which is after famine, to see how Abraham Avinu is going to react. And according to some commentators, he failed the first time, the second time, and then the 10th time, with the most difficult challenge, he's willing to do it because he got to that point of being the great Abraham Avinu, the one who's going to really obey whatever Hashem is telling him to do. And then God really tells him, then you pass the test, and now you are Yireh Elohim, someone who is really in awe of God, someone who's really is serving God, b'chol levavcha, with all your heart, with all your might, with everything that you have. So that's an interesting approach as well, which is Abraham Avinu had to go through all that, had to go down to Mitzrayim.
That's the Ramban.
Right, in order to become the Abraham Avinu. And if he wouldn't go down to Mitzrayim, he wouldn't become the Abraham. That's the Ramban's approach. But that's
the process.
Right, that's exactly the process in order to become the great Abraham Avinu. Which this Forno again seems to disagree with.
This is a very hard position, really. This Forno. I'd like to hear more about it. Because it doesn't, I mean, it seems like in his world, you just do what you're told and things happen to you. You don't have to make any decisions.
Right.
And it can't be that simple.
Wow.
This is Forno. I mean, he must.
There are different opinions about it. Some opinions say that there are Yechides Gula, not too many people, but you have a few tzaddikim who really have so much emunah, so much faith in God that even if they find themselves in the most difficult situation, their approach will be, God will help us.
Yeah.
Okay. But there are not too many of them, because by the way, it's a famous machloket in the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, Talmud Brachot, right? Of what should we do as Jews? Should we work or not work? Right? Why? Because the fact is, one opinion says, you shouldn't do anything. Why? Because if you have faith in God, God will provide you with everything.
Not the Jewish view.
Oh, but there's one view like that.
But
Rabbi Shimon says that.
But how do things happen?
If you have faith in God,
so you sit there and you meditate until it comes through.
it's going to come. And Rabbi Ishmael is the one who says, with all due respect, of course you have to go and work the field and have parnasa. But the Gemara, by the way, concludes and says that some tried to do like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and they were not successful, and the ones who did like Rabbi Ishmael and went and worked their fields were successful.
That's not the son, is it?
No, Rabbi Ishmael is not the son. No. Rabbi Eliezer is the son.
Right.
But the fact is, it's not so. But there are opinion. Rabbi Shimon, for example, says don't do anything. Why you have to wait for God? God is the one who's going to. But to be at that level, it's, I don't know if there's anyone.
Can you imagine a nation sitting on a hot rock, everybody finding this place and doing nothing but meditation?
So that's why.
How long would it last?
So that's why Rabbi Ishmael is the one who. By the way, the halacha, I believe, is like Rabbi Ishmael, where we're not at that level of emunah, of faith, and therefore go out and work and do something.
So was Rabbi Shimon advocating that for everybody?
So that's exactly. Some commentators said that Rabbi Shimon, his approach was for Yechides Gula, just for the few. It's not for the mass.
Right.
But in Rabbi Ishmael is for the rest of us.
It's so much about intent. I mean, if you're going to go sit on the rock, Hashem knows if you're sitting there and being lazy and just waiting for everything to happen for you.
Oh.
But if you're sitting up there, but you're also working, and it's about intent, where your heart is, where who knows that? Does that make any sense?
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The intent, it's very good. Exactly. Kavanah, exactly. Kavanah of the person, what his intent is. Okay? And the second question is, and again, we could discuss it for a few minutes, and this is, how do we know when, God's providence is in a sense gone, and we have to really look for our future, we have to craft our future. Because this is what Abraham Avinu did. When he got to Eretz Canaan, this famine, he doesn't hear anything from God, so he decides, you know what? God had protected me, and he's going to continue on and everything else, but the fact is, he's not communicating with me, which means that I have to take the decision into my own hands, and the right thing to do will be
And then you
to
decide.
go down to Mitzrayim.
That's the Jewish
So the
way.
question is,
Jewish way.
what do we do in our lives? How do we decide that, you know what, now it's time for me to do something? God had led me till here, but from now on it seems that obviously I'm not on my own, God will always be here, but I have to do something. Any ideas? It's a difficult question. I don't think again we'll solve it, but
I've heard this opinion of a rabbi, and he said that the difference between an Ashkenazi and a Sephardi is the education in the way you see master. A Sephardi person in all the Oriental cultures, like if you have karate classes, then you have your sensei, you have your master, and you follow what your master says. And all the Sephardi people, they have the concept of this Rab that will somehow influence your life, and then you're going to do what your master says. And that's why we need a king. That's why we need this.
Like the Hasidim.
the Hasidim as well, right?
That's because they're more Sephardi.
Right.
Whereas you have the Ashkenazi tradition that they think more that they can rule their own world. Why do you need a master if you can rationalize everything and be your own master?
They are more Ishmael.
So that's his opinion, right? So he says that is the difference between Sephardi and Ashkenazi. So it depends on what kind of school of thought you follow. If you're a Sephardi that thinks that you need to have a rab, and then from there on, live your life according to what your rab instructs you to do, or be like an Ashkenazi that you rationalize everything and then you think, well, I can't go my own way. So if you're following,
Who would want to be an Ashkenazi?
if you're following that opinion, then you need a rab. And then the providence comes from the moment that you entrust yourself to the words of your rabbi.
But Ashkenazim as well, by the way, they have what they call Da'at Torah, where they go and they approach the rabbi for his opinion. So,
Instruction, right?
Okay.
I think that
The only difference I would say,
Very
just to develop your idea, is that Sfaradim have a lot of what they call Emunat Tzadikim. Emunat Tzadikim, right? The faith in Tzadikim, in righteous Chachamim, and so on and so forth. You know, that reminds me of this, it's a little joke between the difference, the approach between the different approach between Hasidim and Litaim, the Lithuanians and the Hasidim and the Sfaradim. The Gemara speaks about Yonatan ben Uziel, where Yonatan ben Uziel, when he was studying Torah, they say that when a bird used to fly by, it burned because of the holiness of the words of Torah that he was learning. So what will be the approach of the Hasidim and the Litaim? The Hasidim will say, wow, what a great tzaddik he is, you can imagine his words. And the Litaim will start arguing how much money does he have to pay for the fact that he burned. That's all. And they're going to start analyzing, because that's what the Gemara is all about. How much money does he have to pay, whatever it is, for burning the bird. But that's the idea. The idea is And that's interesting what you're saying, very interesting. Because what is our approach to life as well? And how much emunah should we have as well? Right? And when a tzaddik says something, the bracha of a tzaddik, how serious do you take it? Do you really believe it? And in a sense, it's what Rabbi said as well. Depending on the kavanah the person has, the intent that the person has when he goes to the tzaddik. Right? If he goes and he says, this is bogus, doesn't make any sense, but I'm going to go anyway because someone forced me to go. But if someone really goes and he has emunah, he has faith, and he really believes in that.
Can I give you a specific example? Is like, for instance, let's say that you are a very religious Sephardi person, and then you know that in this spoken world you're not going to make business, right? And then you don't make business, and then you trust that Hashem will provide for you eventually, in one way or another, because you're not going to make business.
Right.
But another person from another background would say, well, maybe I can find a way of doing this business. They even invented that Ish Shabbat Korea or something like that. Or they say
find loopholes.
They find a loophole.
Yeah, but you can't draw that between Ashkenazim and Sephardim.
No.
Because there are lots of Sephardim who do
There's
No,
I can name names.
That
I can name names. I mean, you know.
but you
not with the
understand
cameras
the
work.
concept? Do you understand the idea what I'm trying to
Yeah, but
Yeah,
the
but
fact
I
is,
agree
the fact
with
is,
you, but it's not along those
100%.
That's
It's
probably then.
very good.
It's not
very
along
good.
those
So it's a
lines.
very interesting. So that it's two different approaches, and in a sense, it's coming back to what we were talking about. It's two different approaches of how we would look at life. Do we look at life as something that everything has to make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, so then I have to put some sense into it. Or do you say, you know what? I have to have faith. And therefore, if I have to have faith, sometimes even something does not make any sense, still I have to approach it that way without any logic.
In the end.
Because at the end it will make sense. So it's interesting. And that's the approaches of the Ramban in this form. When the Ramban says, Avraham Avinu, you have to criticize him, but in a sense he wanted to put some sense into what's going on in his family. I'm going to leave Eretz Canaan. His father says, no. Right? So it's interesting. But again, just to conclude, anyone around the table has any idea of how could we define when God doesn't, God basically there's no more providence, and then we have to take it into our own hands? Is there anything, is there any formula to it? Is there any way of knowing or understanding it? Or
it's always in our hands, but whether we vessel God's will or will in general, or whether we don't, or we go with our own ways, which are defect from God's ways, guidelines, like לא תרצח, לא תגנוב, and so on and so on.
I think ultimately,
yeah,
I think it has to do that. The Torah is
That's once you're a Jew. I don't know what with the others.
well, the Torah is our guidebook, right? So we
Yeah.
have to sort of follow it to the best as we can. It says, "Don't stand by idly when you see evil." So you got to take action. You don't, But then again, it's sometimes hard to determine. I think the Jewish way is always through action, right? But if you look at examples in the Torah, sometimes you really don't understand which is the right way. Nachshon was commanded, go, if you want to part the ocean, don't just stand there and pray. Take the first step and part. On the other hand, Yosef, who asked the butler to go up and try to get him out of jail, was punished for that. Why? He took action, right? Noah On the other hand, it says maybe he wasn't the Ish Tzaddik like Abraham. Why? Because maybe he didn't argue for the people. When God said there's going to be a flood, going to wipe all these people out, he said, okay, I'm going to listen to you and just build the ark. So he was kind of criticized for that. Abraham, on the other hand, when he said, go destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, he argued with God, and maybe that's why he was so, I guess we have to follow the Torah as much as we understand the Torah, but ultimately some things we just don't know.
Every time people
it points and reflects on our interaction with God.
and also
If
every
you take
situation
it
is
to
different.
thin,
So,
Every situation is different.
so every situation
When
is
you go to
different.
a big din,
Yes,
I mean,
yes, you're right,
they
you're right.
they
Right,
enter in.
you're right. But the fact is that I think what we have to do sometimes is to present the situation to someone else. If we find ourselves in like Avraham Avinu finds himself, I guess at his time he had no one to turn to,
Except God.
but except God, right? But in our case, in our society, each one of us could approach someone who has wisdom and is close to us and knows us, and ask his or her opinion, I would say.
So maybe at some point we have to just accept that sometimes we can't understand. It happens,
Right.
and Baruch Hashem, we're here because of it.
Right, right,
What else are we going to do?
right. But anyways, I think that the answer will, I don't think there's an answer, we could discuss it, but the fact is it's pretty complex. The whole idea of when do we really have to act or not. But it was interesting to see these two different approaches of the Ramban and this Forno, and both of them, as I said, are certainly right. But and just to conclude, as something comes to my mind, I think that at certain points of our lives we have to take the approach of the Ramban, and other points sometimes you have to this Forno. As I mentioned, depends on the situation that we find ourselves, depends on our feeling as well. Right? Because sometimes there's an inner feeling telling us this is the right thing to do. And many times this inner feeling is right. Okay, it's, in a sense, God God obviously will not reveal himself like he did to Abraham Avinu, but still, he's going to send us a little feeling or a little something that will guide us hopefully through that, and eventually will hopefully make the right decision. Thank you for coming. Okay. לילה טוב. Thank you.
תודה רבה.
לבריאות.
כל שבוע עכשיו.
כן, בעזרת השם. Next week, 8 o'clock.
You're going to edit that, I hope, with all Sam's
What is it?
Sam's wearing comments.
I'm going to. There's a way of, by the way, muting. Mute.
And
They're
you,
They're terrible.
I wasn't thinking that so good.
and you,
Well, I don't think you want to hear such a bitch part.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you for coming.
Yes, it did.
what
Pretty
was the
loud,
content?
too.
What was the content?
I can't remember.
Hi, everybody. So you were
They're
able
going
to
to know it's
hear
you, so forever on YouTube. At a rabbi's class.
I thought it was you. I could have sworn it was
Okay,
you.
good.
Mind you, I don't remember. It was pretty shocking when you said it.
Right. That was hard to hear. But what, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Will I take from the grape shop?
Will do. I understand. But what do you think? What's your approach on you or Linda, of course? What's your approach on it? I mean, the Ramban and the Sforno. What you from your life experience, who do you which commentary or which side would you feel more comfortable with, or the Ramban. Okay, okay.
They'll be stale by next week. They'll be stale by next week.
Right. I hear you. I personally, I don't know. I agree with Linda because I don't think that any of our matriarchs or patriarchs were perfect. Eventually, it became maybe not far from perfect, but it took some time for them to get to that point. It's something that they had to really spend years in order to get to become who they became. As Forno seems to say, no, you know what? No, I mean, you can't. How could you? We can't even understand Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu is a different league than we are, and therefore, because of that, we can't criticize him in any way. The fact is, he was perfect, and whatever we think he did wrong, it's because we don't understand it. And the Ramban says, no, actually, this is the greatness of our matriarchs and patriarchs. The fact is, they made mistakes, but they learned from these mistakes, and because of that, they grew spiritually after making those mistakes. This is the Ramban's approach, and I tend to agree with that, because as it was mentioned in the class, I don't think anyone was born perfect. But the fact is, God is giving us certain challenges in life in order for us to grow from those challenges, to learn something, and to get closer to Him. And this is the Ramban's approach. Good night.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Thanks, Rabbi. Good night.
Good night. Good night.
See you, Rabbi.
Right. Right. Right.
Strengthens your trust in God. So, and we're meant to grow through it, which is why I was inside on the side of the Rabbi.
I understand. Very good. Anyways, good. Excellent. Let's try to be in touch. You know what? I'll text you tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow night. You told me Tuesdays are good for you as well, just to have to chat a little bit, or talit and so on and so forth.
Yeah, sure. Like around the same time, I think.
Be'ezrat Hashem. Oops.
הייתי?
כן.
מה שזה הייתי, שכל ההסבר שלך בקשר לרמב"ם,
כן.
או בקשר
לספורנו, כן.
הכל מקבל יותר דקורציה שנותן, תורם להבנה של העניין, של הקונספט. עליית הנשמות של האבות הייתה הרבה יותר קלה. הם עלו הרבה מהר גבוה. בעזרת מעשה קטן, מצווה קטנה, עלו. למה? קודם כל השכינה הייתה מרובה יותר, וגם הם באים ממקום עמוק יותר. הם היו, החומר שלהם, שהם היו עשויים, היה קדום יותר, טמא יותר. תשים לב מה קורה, השכינה מתמעטת, והטומאה כביכול מתגברת, או לא. היום אנחנו כאילו במאבק בעצם. מה יגבור? האור או החושך? בגדול, אתה יודע. לא רוצה להישמע יותר מדי מיסטי או...
הבנתי, כן.
באמת, זה מה שקרה, אני חושב. שהם עלו גבוה יותר, וככה נעשו צדיקים, ככה נעשו עבודים. כי מכל מיליונים של אנשים יצאו שניים שעשו מעשה טוב. שעשו איזה שנדלק להם אור בלב. לאחרים לא היה אור בלב. אז זה העלייה שלהם, הייתה כנראה יותר גבוהה, וככה הם נעשו אהבות. וזה בקשר לעניין המבחנים, וככה, נחמן עושה מניפולציות על הקומבינות של אברהם, איך לסדר את המצרים, ולמכור את זאת
כן.
זה כבר בא אחרי, זה לא, אתה יודע מה? אולי זה לא לעניין בכלל. הוויכוח הזה. הגישה להיכנס